some seed, some food plot seed, some blends I've been playing with. I had
Yeah.
some growing in some pots upstairs, and they don't, the only free space I could put them for the time being, they don't get a ton of sun. So I run a grow light over them part of the day. But today, 3 days before I plan on leaving to go to one of these seminars, which I had planned to take these beautiful pots of growing lush vegetation with me. I thought it'd be a good idea to take them and set them in the sun, let them get some real high quality sun just because I was around. And my dog decided that he wanted to be a herbivore today, and he ate them all. Cleaned them up. Like ate everything. We were talking like 8 to 10 inches of oats, rye, wheat, sunflowers, peas, beans. The clovers were starting to come up underneath. The brassicas were 6, 8 inches long, and he ate it all. Best part about it is at some point he's going to puke it up. So,
That is weird, man. Why would he? Well, I don't know. My dogs eat a lot of grass.
yeah, I think that's what it is. They like to eat grass, whether their stomach's upset or whatever. I don't know. Welcome to the Regenerating Nature Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Milsna, the owner and operator of the Untamed Ambition, a habitat consulting and project management business. My co-host is with us today, Taylor Henry. He's a regenerative farmer and realtor. And today we get into a pretty good conversation about just planning and preparing for spring. The things that we have coming up in our own lives with our own operations. We talk about grazing systems. We talk about water infrastructure within those grazing systems. We talk about some different trees and some projects I'm doing on the deer habitat side of things, and how the deer really seem to prefer certain tree species for browse once you put those tops on the ground. A lot of bedding area improvement and edge feathering going on right now. And then we talk a little bit about frost seeding and again, just really overall preparing for spring that's coming, even though it seems like winter is really trying to hold on. So enjoy the episode. If you're listening to this audio only, this is also on YouTube if you want to watch as opposed to just listening. And as always, please, if you get something out of this, like, share, leave a comment, give us some feedback, and just, help us know that you enjoy what you're listening to. And if there's anything that catches your ear or your eye in these videos and you want to learn more about it, let us know. Otherwise, thanks for listening and enjoy. That's the problem. I mean, it's caused by Amazon. It's that Amazon effect, right? Where
Yeah.
everyone thinks that they click a button and they should get it right now. It's half the problem with our frickin' society is no one has patience for anything, and that's why I see a lot of these issues on the habitat side of things. I'm sure you're aware, right? It's like no one has the patience to make habitat improvements and let that land heal. They always want to try and force things into it. I mean, that's really that whole giant miscanthus conversation, right? I mean, let's put this
Yeah.
grass in the ground because it's going to be 15 feet tall in 2 years and low maintenance and this and that, and it shouldn't spread. I'm telling you, it doesn't spread. We did all this research to make sure that it wouldn't spread, but right on the box, it says that it spreads through the rhizomes and the roots and to plant them at this spacing and they fill in the rows over time. It's like, okay, whatever.
So what's going to happen to these places with these things planted? Because we don't have any like long-term data on people planting this
No,
on their properties. So like in 10 years, the worry is that all of a sudden you're going to have a half acre.
I, I mean, from my perspective, on the more of the biological side of things, I don't think it's going to happen that soon. I think what I see happening with something like that is, first and foremost, it's, again, it's taking up the place of a native that actually fits that niche in the ecosystem. So
Yeah.
there's already a negative to it there. But typically, with all these invasives, if there's nothing in that ecosystem that feeds on that plant or breaks down the nutrients in one way, shape, or form to convert it to a different nutrient or a different form of energy, then that plant really runs wild at some point. So what I see happening is somebody that has one of these hunting properties with a bunch of stuff on it, they eventually quit hunting or sell the property, whatever it might be, and it kind of goes neglected for a while and just does whatever it wants. Who knows how long a generation goes by, and then all of a sudden it's choked out a complete ecosystem, and who knows? Or in a generation it evolves slightly and does start going to seed, and then birds start carrying seeds around, or that's what happens with some things. And I don't know. I mean, that's why I try not to overthink that stuff, because uh, there are some opinions involved, but when it comes down to the science of it, it's like you're better off just sticking with a native that's evolved that way. Nature works out all those kinks on its own and has been doing so for 4 billion years. But we humans, we know so much in our vast 40 to 50 years of existence on this planet. And 40 to 50 years before you become a knowledgeable intellect that can make decisions or influence people to make decisions. But yeah, no, it is what it is. You saw the comment. There was a comment on YouTube about giant miscanthus. He mentioned, or he asked about native food plot plants and how no one has native food plot plants.
Well, we're more talking about like perennial plantings, right? We're talking about native. I mean, what if you want to get into like native food plot plantings? Like, I mean, our oats and rye and
There
things like
are,
that considered native?
I doubt it. I mean, there are native wild rye for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, because to bring back what true native plants are, they're what are living on the ecosystem without
correct.
our interaction. So yeah, the annual production stuff wouldn't be native.
And I think that's the key factor there, is that it's not, those food plot plants are mostly annual, and they're not supposed to be part of an ecosystem. They are, they're feeding the soil. They're the,
I think the conversation with the native plantings is more to make sure that if people are planting, I think the bedding area discussion is the biggest issue with that, because it's gotten so popular.
yeah,
Where if you were just like, those areas are needed to just manage for native regrowth, allowing pastures and perennial areas that you don't plan on having annual production, making sure that they turn into native plants, so they kind of take care of themselves in a good way.
yeah,
Especially with like the bedding
they
areas, how much people could get away with just leaving things fallow.
no, they absolutely could. I mean, I think you're hitting the highlight there, right? It's like the difference between management. A crop area is managed more intensively, relatively speaking, so that it produces more and is more controlled, right? Like a food plot, we're planting food plots so that we have, I guess shouldn't speak for everyone, but I plant food plots so that I have a consistent, lush, attractive, nutrient dense. They're all really synonymous there when it comes to white-tailed deer, but I've got this attractive, consistent food source in a specific location to pull deer through it, right? That's a food plot. Even if I had a property where I was trying to plant larger destination food plots, I would still do that with strategy so that those deer kind of flow to and from those larger destination food sources. But either way, those food plots are managed completely differently. They're not, like you said, planted as a perennial type situation where you're trying to let it kind of manage itself with, some periodic disturbance, some controlled disturbance in there. And that's where that argument, I don't know, the arguments that he throws up, and we are officially recording, by the way, so let's just keep this rolling. We'll do a little rewind, start from the beginning of this conversation and bring it back. But we're back on the giant miscanthus topic because we received a couple comments on YouTube. We had a great podcast last week with Tom Groves, a botanist who has spent the bulk of his career managing invasive plants and is very adamant about restoring native ecosystems. I don't know if it's his slogan originally, but he uses it frequently and I can get behind it. And that's that whole native plants or die. Or does it say plant native or die? Which one is it?
I think it's native plants or die.
Yeah. Because it really makes sense, right? It's not so much a threat like plant native plants or you die. It's more of like, we need native plants or we're going to die. So I can get behind that. And this giant miscanthus thing, I've had a lot of people reach out to me. Ironically, a lot of people that don't actually listen to this podcast or haven't watched the podcast, they just question me frequently about giant miscanthus and bring up the names in the industry that are pushing it all the time. And, these guys are constantly trying to defend themselves. I don't know if I should even say those guys. I mean, it really is one main individual is kind of voicing this movement, but constantly trying to defend themselves on why giant miscanthus is, in their opinion, not an issue. But again, I don't know. It's the same thing like with my kids, man. It's like, if it's one less variable that I can remove that has potential issues down the road, then why not do it? Right? Like,
I think there's other options, there's other solutions to it. Wouldn't you say just the easiest one would be that I could get behind? It would be planting native switch, and then if you really wanted a barrier, just go in front of the switchgrass and drill in some sorghum or wheat and get it really high just for the first couple of years.
Yeah,
you
for
might need
sure.
3 years of that, but
I mean, there's no silver bullet solution there. It all comes back to patience. The sorghum.
It's like the Walmart version of covers walking to your stand.
Yeah.
Although how tall does it get the first year?
Switchgrass?
No, the miscanthus.
I think it's actually fairly similar to how switch establishes and matures. It just doesn't fill in right away, but I think it gets 3 to 4 feet tall the first year. I don't know. I don't know that much about the planting regimen because I don't promote it, and I
don't know.
I only have so much bandwidth.
If it grows similar to switch, it probably gets a little bit taller. I don't know. Switchgrass seems, I think in this year would be the first time where I could walk behind the wall of switchgrass I have, and it'll be its 4th growing season.
But you took a significantly different management approach to establishing it too, didn't you? Just basically toss it down in an existing perennial stand.
The best line was drilled in.
Okay.
Into a bean stubble or corn stubble from the year before, which I do think that's important. With all the first year plantings that I did, I'd probably treat it a lot differently if I just was taking over like a giant CRP field or weed field. I think corn fields and soybean fields are a nice thing to drill stuff into the first spring you have it, or frost seed.
I mean, I think it just comes down to the condition of the soil also. That's
the assumption is that's not going to be very good if you're taking over a existing
over farmed.
And I didn't do any amendments. So what I'm seeing right now is the plants that truly just succeeded with cutting the land off cold turkey. Switchgrass did really well. I have a really good line of it. As long as it wasn't, I got a good I got a good stretch where it was pretty much, and I remember the day I planted it, I'd been planting for like 7 hours. I didn't know at that time if anything I was even doing was working. Like, dude, try to plant this thing out in a wide open cornfield and everything that I have going on with it. I'm like, ah, at the end, I was like, this is stupid. I'm an idiot. Like, I have no clue what's going on. But every single spot I drilled in of switchgrass that day, I could go out and find right now.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
made
it's
sense, and I followed the map, but there was one section that I must have done a better job where
yeah.
and that spot turned out really well. But I think it's
I'm
all going to
actually
grow in.
I'm actually well, depending on how the spring goes, I was gonna try this year to drill it in while the ground's still semi-frozen. You know, we get
But
that.
what do you think about frost seeding it?
Oh, I can 100% get behind frost seeding it. The only issue there is there's a lot more variables involved, right? And like if you're trying to do a more defined strip somewhere here or there, we're trying to maximize space in some of these areas and also bring in some of those more, human, some of those more human aesthetics, the things that appeal to humans with the clean lines. Then drilling it in is nice too. But if we're doing, I've got this one property, actually the property that we're doing this habitat camp on in a couple weeks in Ettrick, Wisconsin. There's a centrally located access route. It's the only way to get in and out of this property to hunt. So it's probably a half mile long or longer. I mean, that's a long ways to just walk and broadcast and frost seed and try to have a nice uniform trail, right? It's different if
Yeah.
you're just kind of like filling in corners and whatnot. But the other thing too is it's not prepped. The ground's not prepped at all. So part of it's already grass, cool season grasses that had been mowed. Actually, I think a fair amount of it was mowed. The previous landowner to this gentleman, they had like a park up on top of this. It was beautiful. Very interesting property. But I'm just going to try to drill it into semi-frozen ground, when things are mostly thawed out, but then freeze in the morning, go up there and drill it in right away in the morning. So it stratifies for a period of time at least, but it's in a more controlled location. And then we'll probably hit it with one round of herbicide right when things start to green up, and that's it. And then the goal is to burn it to manage or mitigate the cool season grasses. Because if you get cool season grasses up to 4 to 6 inches in height or so, and then you burn them, you'll stunt them a lot, and it pulls a lot of their root reserves out, so they come back a lot weaker, and you can kind of thin them that way instead of this. I'm just trying to get away from this industry routine of spray, 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 leave it bare ground for a season. They talk about this sacrificing one season to have basically a bare, sterile environment to drill switch into or frost seed into the following spring. So I'm trying to do it all in 1 year and then just build it up without ever really having a life-free zone, always having a living root in that system to make sure. And it's also on a hillside, which is another key factor. The last thing you want to do is go in there and prep for something silly like an access route and then lose a foot of topsoil and a couple waterways, right?
Well, I just think it does that. I planted that cave in the mound stuff. I just think it's one of the most successful things to plant. Like, it
As long
just
as
does really
as long as you have
well.
good seed to soil contact and maintain or mitigate the competition, that's the big thing.
Yeah, but I think that can be accomplished by just mowing it, and I think it'll naturally outcompete. You just might not. You're gonna just. I think it's not gonna be like the perfect. It's not gonna get tall that quickly, but from what I'm seeing, because even the spots that I didn't know about that I've done zero management for the last couple of years, now that I can see them, because right now is a great time to go out and see where they're at compared to everything else, because it holds its it holds its base together so well and has such a obvious color right now. And there's spots I never mowed or did anything with, and it's still there, and like it has a strong base to it. Whereas I think the mowing portion that for those first 2 years is a big deal.
Yeah, and you mow it 8-10 inches high. So you're basically
I
you're
mean,
not
just
really
yeah,
trying to
just
mow that
clipping.
so much as you're trying to eliminate the competition or level the playing field, right?
Yeah, and it's the timing of it too. Like that stuff outcompetes everything in July and August.
Yes. Yep.
Like it just blows up. So if you can keep things under control, and like how I would do it, you could, if you were super interested in keeping the just time down, I would mow it once in like May and then once in June, and then let it go do its thing in July and August, because it seems to just be a big, it beats out everything during that time, and then maybe mow it in the fall, and then do the same thing the next
No,
spring.
you don't want to mow in the fall. Uh, you don't want to mow warm season grasses in the fall. You don't want to graze them too heavily in the fall either, because that's that time of the year when they're pulling all their reserves back down to the root system because they're a perennial plant. So that's a good way to weaken your stand. In fact, if you want to thin out like a switchgrass field, say you plant it too thick, or any warm season grass for that matter, you want to thin that out, then burn it in the fall, and it'll stunt the growth of that plant the next year, and you'll start to see it thin out a little bit more. But no, mowing it is definitely spot on, especially because most of your competition, at least for my experience, most of the competition comes from foxtail. So if you can cut the head off that foxtail so it doesn't go back to seed, because that's a biannual, right?
Yeah,
So
well, I don't get too worried about foxtail. That seems to, it's just a weak plant. It
yeah.
hurts you the first year, but whatever's there, if it has any type of balls to it, it's going to outcompete it. I mean, I think that's the nice thing about what we're planting, because I'm seeing how switchgrass works similar to the other perennial grasses that I planted, which is, the big one I'm looking at a lot is fescue and Timothy. Those are the main ones in orchard grass in my
Yeah.
pasture settings. And foxtail definitely dominated them the first year, and they definitely outcompeted it in the next year.
Is that what was in that NRCS mix that you put in? Did you put
Yeah,
it in? You put it in a mix for them.
they recommend more fescue and Timothy. I think I added in more orchard grass and a couple other grasses in it. I have to look back at the actual mixes. But
Yeah,
those
it's
are the
gonna.
ones that seem to be taking off the best. Timothy obviously identifies itself really well in the winter or in the spring. Um, Fescues identifies itself the best in the winter because it's the best stockpile forage. So it's the best stuff that it's like laying hay on the ground. It's big, thick. It's the mat of the soil right now, and they actually graze it in the winter.
That's good.
And then orchard grass, those big clumps. And they seem to graze that pretty well in the winter. That's definitely not their first choice, but you know,
Yeah. Well, they can if they can dig it up, right?
and of those things, Timothy's probably more similar to um switch, because it's a small seed that I think you can get away with frost seeding.
Just don't plant Timothy if you're on a wildlife only habitat. It's good for grazing, but that's about where you draw the line.
Yeah, I mean it's a cool season grass. So
Yeah.
my why I don't think I've ever mowed that switch in the fall. But the reason I said that you could is because if it's competing with fescue and orchard and Timothy, those are the times that those take off in the fall. But I just think switch outcompetes them so much in July and August, and it just literally grows like right before your eyes. It's crazy how quickly it grows in those 2 months.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to watch those pastures in general, everything in them. Some of those forbs, the natives that pop up in there at certain times that you don't really notice, and then all of a sudden one day you're out there and it's 3 feet tall.
Bird's foot trefoil is the one that the native that I see pop up the most that you just wouldn't expect. And I did not notice the first year when we weren't grazing it. But when we started grazing the areas that were just native like waterways, and I never planted any seeds. The second year of grazing, like last spring, there was tons and tons of bird's foot trefoil flowers that popped up in the spring. It was crazy.
Hmm.
Like the
And
whole
that's a
hillside.
legume. That's a
Yeah.
legume. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if we could translate that to, I'm gonna try to plant some of that actually this year to see how it does, just because it's naturally there. Um, and those are the areas that I look at as the examples of where if you have a CRP type field, or you do have just bigger areas that maybe weren't being farmed. I mean, those are the things that battled through the most stuff and survived.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
They're hardy.
they survived getting sprayed alongside them for years and years and years. And like, there's a hard line. So that's like your true seed bank. That's how I look at that area. And I've never put seed in those spots.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I know.
But I will say too, in my fallow testing areas, when I walked out there a couple weeks ago and we actually didn't have any snow, it's incredible to see like complete ground cover. So 3 years it took for the ground to be truly covered, like there's no bare spots. Because last winter, I know for sure, I was like, damn, this stuff is just taking time to get cover, actual good coverage throughout the ground. So 3 years of growing it took, where there's just a solid mat you cannot find. You'd have to dig down through the thatch to find dirt.
That's good. Growing, and how much of your grazed area have you now covered with hay, rolled out hay during the wintertime?
Graze like that, the perennial paddocks, probably only like 10%,
Oh,
5 to
really?
10% of the ground. Yeah, we've been hitting I've been hitting hard the annual, what I've been doing for food plots and cover crop, because I have two front fields that I treat as what I would plant solely with the reason of feeding cattle. So those two cover crop fields that are about an acre, and then I work back a ridge, which I think is a smart plan to do annual. Like those top fields are an issue as far as just drilling in and not having fertilizer, and I think they're kind of robbed of any nutrients. But feeding cattle out that ridge is so much better than if you had to be down low somewhere right
Yeah,
now.
for sure.
And then all that nutrient, like, that you're stocking all of this nutrients on the top of the ridge, and it's all just going to leak down the hill like what you want.
Yeah.
um Plus it's less snow, the amount of snow on that ridge. So when we're battling like actual snow falls and getting them through the snow to these bales, the least amount of snow is on top of the ridge too. So it makes, it's first place to dry out too.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets a lot more airflow, wind blown.
Yeah. So those areas are what we graze majority of in the winter right now.
So
Now,
are
if I
you
double my herd like I'm planning for next winter, then we'd probably be hitting about 30 to 40% of the pastures, and then maybe, I think all of these annual fields will be wintered on. I think that is the solution. If you were, the Gabe Brown method, if you are doing annual production on these fields, an animal has to take and be a part of that process, I think twice a year. I think right away, right before you plant whatever you're planting in the spring, and then I think they should hammer it all winter.
okay? So let me run this by you. So I've had this plan in my head for a long time, and then now I got my dad on board to let me run out this management system. Specifically, right now I'm talking about this pasture system. So the north end of our farm it's basically one big valley. I think it's 150-acre pasture. There's a little bit of timber connected to it that's not pastured, and then for the most part, it's surrounded by the ridgetop tillable land. That's, if you're not familiar with it, that's kind of how the topography and the terrain lays out in southwestern Wisconsin. As you go north along the river, it flips a little bit more, where the ridges get a little bit steeper, a little bit narrower. That's when you get up in the Buffalo County, the famed Buffalo County area, and they mostly farm the bottom land. or the valleys, and the ridge tops and everything are covered in timber. But down by us, it'd be Vernon County. That is more rolling hills, less bluffy, and the ridge tops are everything that's farmed, and the valleys are typically pastured or just kind of left fallow at this point. If
That's
it
it.
just
That's a
depends on
good
who
way of
owns it.
putting that.
So it that farm, the north, we actually refer to it as our north farm. It's part of an old ranch land. I think my dad bought it way back when, I don't, late 80s, early 80s actually. It was part of this giant like 20,000 or 30,000 acre ranch in that area. But this particular valley it's about 150 acres, and there's one main valley or wash, watershed that runs. It actually kind of starts at the southern end of that, and it runs straight north south, and then it's intersected about halfway through our property by another pretty large valley that runs almost straight east west. Okay, so there's two access points, actually technically three access points to this pasture, but two that are reliable to get a trailer in or out. The one closest to the main farm, we actually don't even really trailer cattle out of that pasture anymore. Usually just herd them out and push them down the road because it's like a quarter mile away, or wait until the crops are off at the end of the season and push them in the fields along the road. But that's usually where they dump cattle, and they dump cattle on that east side. So my plan, the pasture is currently split. I rebuilt an old line fence in there probably 10 years ago uh, for this exact purpose, but at the time I wasn't on this level of detail. But the plan is to manage the whole pasture and improve it. There's a lot of issues with invasives in there. Multiflora rose is the main culprit in that situation. So get in there and clear that up and manage it a little bit better. But the plan is to have that east side of the pasture as the cool season area mostly. And then the west side of the pasture is going to be more of the warm season area as far as grasses go. And then, so we dump the heifers. These are all young stock dairy cattle that'll be in there. But sometimes there's a mixture of some beef in there as well. So we dump all the cattle in the east side until, I mean, they're never in there that early, but I'm thinking probably mid-May, early June. And then I'm going to give them access to the west side and let them spend time over there for, the issue is they're not mob grazing. They kind of are left to their own devices, but you kind of move them around that way. But uh, leave them over there for a period of time, then use them to terminate and cycle the next generation of the food plot that's on that end of the valley, and then kick them out of there, push them back into the east side for a period of time, do the same thing. I've got another food plot on that side, and then eventually work them back over to the food plot on the west side late in the summer, but not let them graze the pasture as long, so that those warm season grasses can actually grow and create some more structure over there, because that's where the bulk of the wildlife or the bulk of the timber that's untouched is. So it's a little bit better hunting opportunities on that end. The other side's mostly tillable with just the pasture. But I'm just trying to figure out that plan of how do I rotate them through as efficiently as possible, because again, it's not mob grazing or as intense rotational grazing like you're doing, where you have all these different paddocks. It'd be trying to break it down into just a few different paddocks. And I'm not against adding more in there, but again, it's not
Are
convenient
you,
by any means
is
to
this
go
the
out there.
property that, like, so I'm looking at one, it kind of has like three big, um, I don't know, like valleys or fingers that are, like that work along a creek. So
And
you're
there's
saying like
water,
how you graze it?
correct? Because there's water. I mean, there's pretty consistent water at the bottom of that valley in every direction. There's a spring that feeds the start of a creek on the west side, in the west end, and then there's a handful of springs that feed the start of another creek, and that's actually the start of the West Fork of the Baraboo River, I believe.
I sent you a
Yeah.
screenshot.
Yep, that's it. That's the one.
And that north line is a hard border.
The
It
north
almost looks
line's,
like
yep.
whoever's grazing that valley is grazing into the north neighbor.
I guess the screenshot you sent me is cut off on the north side.
Oh, yeah. I would do is just because what do they do right now? They have full access to all that timber.
Correct.
Huh. Yeah, I actually like how it's set up because you could just make long paddocks and you could
Because
pull
they
down
have
and rip
what
down whatever you'd have.
they'd have
I would
water
run,
access all the time.
yeah, I'd run a line right down the middle. I'd run a line right along the creek. Split and then go, strip graze one way on one side of the creek and strip graze the other way on the other side of the creek. And then because another thing that is a big issue with, the kind of free range grazing along creeks is they abuse creeks. So a lot of times, like if I don't have a creek that I'm grazing right now, and actually I don't have them in either of the two properties I'm setting up, but if I were to have one, they would not get full blown access to it.
Yeah, because they do destroy the banks.
Yeah, and that's just one. That's another way that they're destructive. They're destructive animals if you allow it.
Yeah, well,
And
that's if they're in
but
one
I would,
spot for too long.
I think you could move them pretty successfully, even if you just wanted to move them once a week. Because what you could do is just either strip graze them and let them backtrack, for a week or two. How often would you go down and check on them?
Well, my brother lives nearby, so the idea is to have some sort of management plan that's automated as much as possible. With the food plot integration, stuff like that, it would be kind of in this time frame, open up this gate and then put a cell camera over it to know when they actually move into that side of the pasture. So you don't have to, you're just managing the access points for them, and you're not going in there and actually pushing them. Because
Yeah,
the biggest issue
my goal would be to try to find. I can kind of see it right now. I do the measurements, but I would try to do about 10 paddocks that are equal in size, and that's equal in grazing size. So like if you have a wooded area, you have to kind of subtract a little bit of what you think you could graze on it, versus just a wide open grass pasture. Obviously you can graze it better, but and then you have 10, and then you kind of just subsection those 10 spots as best you can. That's your weekly setup and tear down.
Yeah,
but that gives you, so that would give you 6 to 7 days on each paddock, and then that would let you target the goal of allowing 45 to 60 days of rest.
and just basically, I mean, in that case, it'd probably make most sense to try and push them to the west side as early as possible, so that they're out of the west side as early as possible.
Yeah, because you wanted to time. So you're saying there's like a production field looks like on the west, like above where that creek is. Is that what you're talking about as a food plot?
Let me pull that up here again. Yes.
So my timing on food plots is either what, depending on obviously what you're planting. But if maybe it's just a broadcast cool season food plot that you want to make sure you kind of nail in that August range.
It's gonna be the same exact rotation that we no-till drill and roll down with the crimper. So it's gonna be,
so that'd be hard. It'd be hard in there in the spring.
Well,
right?
It wouldn't be in there, and that's the thing though, is they can be in the west side of that pasture in the spring, but not in the food plot right away. So I wouldn't give them access to that food plot until June. And really, if if the timing's right, they would be in that pasture, then they hit the food plot, and then they're gone. So you kick them out of the food plot after 24 hours. They basically just go in there one night, one day, eat as much as they can, lay around, poop a lot, smash everything down, trample everything, and they're gone, and that's it. And then they're out of there. Then the next thing is trying to move them from that end of the pasture back into the east side of the pasture. Again, trying to avoid actually having to push them, just trying to entice them. But one issue that I see with this that I know is going to be a problem is there's never heifers in that pasture that have been there before. You don't have that old matriarch that can lead the herd around and really understands the routine. So it's all just kind of them figuring things out, which maybe actually is part of the solution too, is to get some old beef cow or something that you can run in there with them time after time and train her. Because once they figure out that routine, they know kind of where they're going, and then it's not so difficult. I just
I
don't
don't
want.
I don't I don't it's not as hard to move them a long ways as you probably think. They just need to be trained to hot wire.
Well, yeah, that's part of it, but the hot wire system isn't exactly something I want to take on in that timber where you're constantly having to worry about branches falling down, stuff like that, or trimming out those trails. Every time there's a storm in the summertime, stuff like that. And that valley is a pain to push cattle through because of all the topography and how steep the hills are and stuff like that. So if you get them in the right
Yeah, well,
spot, you can go, but otherwise you
I would
can't
have
really.
I would have one good hot wire right down along the creek because it has the best sun. That's where you put your solar charger. And then I'd run, just hot wire off that because all of the surrounding area has hard fence, um, to where you don't want them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could just section that thing off. At the very minimum, you could section it at least, right down the middle of each one of those like long grass valleys.
Yeah, that's
Because
probably
that
what I'll
gives
do.
you
I mean, it's,
6 to 8, however you want to section it. But
and the nice thing is if they do push through it, which they inevitably will, uh, then they can't really go anywhere. They're still contained.
yeah, the perimeter fences, I mean, at least there's no reason to go perimeter electric if it's already there and it's good fence.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but I would run it down where you want to just make, just little subtle moves too. If you're doing week by week rotations, plus that's how you're going to keep them on um, that food plot, isn't it?
Is rotate them, you mean, or electric fence?
Well, you have a hot wire around that food plot, or is there already
Yeah.
hard fence around there?
No, there's a hard fence on one border of it. I might actually put a hard fence around the whole thing. We'll just have to see because there's a stark difference between Holstein heifers and beef cattle on how they test fences. But again, it's all a training thing. So if they catch on quickly and they also have, adequate resources where they are, then they don't push on those fences as much either. But I just know that I mean, I'm sure young beef heifers are probably very sprightly as well, but I've seen Holstein heifers jump over 6-strand barbed wire fences like a deer before, or just run
Probably
straight
hungry.
through them. Well, they just are a little bit wirier when they're that age until they get older and they get lethargic. But um, no, that's kind of the plan. I mean, that's the goal anyway.
What we should do is have you pull it up on your map and go through it sometime too.
Yeah, we can definitely do that in the very near future. I was actually just going to say that we'll map it out and share it as a map it and kind of show that rotation because I'd like to get your feedback on it while we do it too and be a good learning experience for everyone. But no, I
Yeah,
mean
and
it's
I'm setting up 2 places right now, or this spring, and the one place is I'm going to be, where it's just you have all the paddocks lined out, and then you just have the amount of wire and fencing to only be using, 3 paddocks at a time. So this place would be, a lot of long lines, and but there's already trails there, but there's a lot of long lines that then you bump them into the next paddock, and then you're always just moving that back fence up to the next spot. So that is like 16 paddocks with and we're only going to have 3 lines of hot wire, and we're going to rely on the current hard fence that's the perimeter, and we're just going to run hot wire down these valleys and then either strip graze the valleys, or do if we get better water infrastructure, then we can run water all the way along down them.
That was going to be my question, what you have for infrastructure there right now.
Well, he has a well and he has some water lines.
Okay.
That's Mark's farm, and then the other farm we're doing, the brand new farm, is we're installing the well and the water lines this spring. So that's nice because I'm getting to essentially kind of set it up the way I'd like to set it up.
Yeah.
Working with the owner.
What's a well running these days to get drilled? How deep is that?
Well, highly dependent on where it's at, but if you're up in the ridge areas of Vernon, you're looking at 25 to 30,000, and then if you're in the valleys, like low valleys, you're maybe under 15.
I think the wells at our farm are over 400 feet deep.
On the ridges, that would be like 40. That'd be like 40, 45.
Yeah.
I usually do about 1,000 or 400 feet, you said?
400. Yeah, they're over 400, I'm pretty sure.
Like whatever the math is on that. So in my head, I just think 40,000.
Yeah.
It's like $100 a foot or something, or $1,000 a foot, $100 a foot.
Yeah, but that's the price you pay for that access or that convenience to that water too.
Well, I think it's necessary. I think you get on a property, you need that. Once you have one, and I think it makes a lot of sense to put it higher to start with.
For sure.
Because that's something we're looking at. This other farm is like, well, we could just go down right off the road and put the electrical and the water right there, and that'll be the cheapest right now. But I'm saying, spend the extra couple thousand right now, have the whole system set up where you're pulling water at your highest point, because then everything else is going to be gravity. Because if all hell goes, if we all go sideways, all you're gonna have to do then is just get enough electricity through solar or something to get that well pumping, but you're not going to need to pump it anywhere. You just need to get the water out of the ground, and then everything is going to be gravity fed. Not everyone is that lucky, especially if you have a homestead down in the valley and you have maybe a field up top.
Well, there's solutions for that. Have you ever seen those?
Ram pumps are the best.
Yeah, exactly. Actually bought all the parts to make one. I was going to rig something up on the side of my house here. All my rain gutters are plumbed into drain tile that come out on the hillside. And I was going to rig something up there to use a ram pump to pump it back up the hill into a water container to irrigate my garden with. Got everything in place. I just haven't had time to put it all together and figure out how to plumb it.
Yeah. Well, and that's I think they say about 1 foot of, because you're taking advantage of water dropping, and then it's self sending water up, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's like, I think it's every 1 foot of drop is 7 feet of climb or something for them.
Yeah,
I watched a video on it yesterday, actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, it's super important, because I have not had to cross that road yet where I need to get water up a hill. But that would be my first thought would be those ram pumps, and people seem to have luck with them. It's not as clean as just hooking onto your well and sending everything down through gravity. But I think that would be the solution if I was in a valley, even working with a creek and thinking about yanking it out of the creek and sending it different places to move your water around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good option actually for that other pasture if I wanted to go that route.
And, a lot can be accomplished by just having good pipe too. So we're doing that at Mark's, where we're going to use 200 PSI, 1 inch, maybe even 1.5 inch, where we're going to drop and then go up the other side of the slope. The theory there is, as long as we have, I don't know,
it's like a siphon type action where you
essentially
have
like
more volume.
The amount of feet you drop, theoretically, you should be able to rise.
Correct.
Just with a pipe. And for whatever reason, the PSIs help it too, I think. you know, we go higher, 200 psi is the thicker pipe. I think it can handle, you can get more pressure built in. Well, that's what it was. Something to do with PSI where it's like it obviously builds more pressure and it allows it to carry it further.
Yeah.
But it's more expensive.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That'll be interesting. I got to get out there and check that system out.
And then once we get to where we're not worried about gravity or anything, I'm thinking now I'm going to go down into more of like the 3/4 to 1/2 inch poly, because that's significantly cheaper than this 1-inch pipe. Man, it's expensive, especially 200 psi.
Yeah.
And if we're
Yeah.
not going uphill or worried about, I think it helps you with freezing sometimes too. But so we're going to get some smaller
Does
lines this year too.
does he irrigate any of his orchards?
Yeah, that's what it's all set for.
Okay.
I don't know if he
And
still does or not.
that's what I'm
But
trying to
that's
avoid anywhere possible is the irrigation. But if
But I don't think
if
it's that bad. Especially when you get some of that drip tape, that really small drip tape, you can get a lot of feet for relatively cheap. And what that provides you as
yeah,
far as
as
success,
far as
like,
yeah, for sure. For sure. It's just, not only the added cost, but it's added maintenance as well. Uh, if you have any mechanical apparatus
well,
in
I
there.
believe in that. I believe in, getting expensive fittings to begin with. That's about
Yeah.
90% of your maintenance, and then trying to drive over the thing or mow it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. Try not to. No, I know that's what I'm trying to figure out, but these trees, most of the trees that we're planting are full-size trees, so the root system's a lot deeper. Even the apple trees, we're not planting dwarf stock trees, so once that root system's established, they go a lot deeper. But I don't know, I suppose you can always add it if we start
Well, I
to hit
just think it's
dry
now that I'm
spell.
obviously, especially if you're thinking about grazing the property, I just think the water infrastructure is just a must, and it's probably the most expensive thing, but it's such an important thing. You either do that or you go Mark's route where you go all the keyline designs and excavate everything, and then you have essentially your own natural water holding areas.
Yeah, with the swale system.
Or you put a pond in that's going to be naturally filling and then stick a pipe out the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And then you can hook up whatever garden hoses to that. That's always an option. Or if people have a filled in pond and you need to trench it out while the excavator's there, you might as well stick a pipe in it.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of grazers doing that.
A lot of options. I know we're fortunate. Most of our farm, I mean, there's a creek running through every single valley, so a lot more options as far as when it comes to grazing cattle goes.
In
But
those bottoms, but how when
they
you get up on top of the hill there, that would be a battle.
correct. But that's where that ram system I think is about as efficient as it gets because it doesn't require any power to run it, right? It's a very simple system. As long as the plumbing remains intact, it's hard for that system to fail.
Well, also you could easily bring a line from wherever that water and run it down along that ridge. You can send water a long ways as long as the gravity's going the right way. You could, if that whole ridge, that whole egg field that was, that's in high ground was turned into grazing, you just run a water line right out the middle of it too.
Yeah. I mean, you could run, yeah, straight from the farm all the way out the ridge line, right? It's a pretty sweet setup how it lays out.
If that's the farm right to the south, then yeah, I mean, you'd have to go up about, if you could get up to that 1,300-foot marker on the topo map, then you could run it all the way.
Yeah, the very north end of that farm where that road ends is the highest point on the farm. It's also a good spot to watch fireworks from. From that location, you can see about 6 different towns worth of fireworks on the right night.
It's a good spot to graze some cattle.
It's a good spot to park your car and talk sweet to your high school girlfriend. Not
There
that
you
I've
go.
ever done that before, but no, it's funny. You've been out,
I just
have you
think
been,
I think waterline's awesome. If you even the deer hunters, like you just run some out there, as much money as people spend on their food plots, like you get a dry year. If you had 1,000 feet of um water line, you could water your food plots.
well, I mean, I shouldn't talk because I irrigated my food plots this year, but they were also ones next to my house that I planted in October, and it didn't rain all of October, so really didn't have a
Well,
whole lot of a choice.
dude, I was trying to. The first year I was here, we had that terrible drought that second half of the summer, so all the fall food plots were just terrible. And I was going out and I was hauling water with IBC totes. And I didn't do that very many times to realize that was just stupid.
It takes a lot of water to irrigate
Yeah, you
a
need
food plot.
lines.
I mean, it's a
Yeah.
lot different if you're drip taping on tree roots or something like that, right? But yeah, it's insane because I did the same thing one year. I hauled a couple big water totes out, hooked up a pump, ran the pump. I also ran a fire hose down into, actually it was on that end of the farm, down into the creek, and ran that pump. And man, you could run that pump. I don't even know what the flow rate was, how many gallons per minute, but it's a pretty big gas powered. I think it was like a 2.5 or maybe even a 5 horse transfer pump. And you run that thing for 2 hours, and the ground soaks up so much so fast that you hardly even notice that you're running it. You shut it off for 10 minutes and it's already dry again. But that's the beauty of going no-till, right? When you're not breaking up that soil, because then all that water that hits actually stays there. None of it evaporates. It all gets down into the soil, how the plants can actually use it.
Yeah, as long as there isn't a bad hard pan.
Correct. Yeah, and
Yeah.
well, even then it takes a lot. But yeah, you see those fields, those irrigated fields that when it does rain, and they look like a lake, right? But no, it's, I don't know. I've
Well,
definitely thought about it.
I follow some ranchers out in Wyoming or in those places, and if they irrigate fields, they literally just open a giant valve and they
Flood it.
flood them.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I see that in Wyoming from time to time.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
maybe it might have been Wyoming too.
it's definitely interesting. I've been slowly trying to open up this food plot that I've got behind my house, because my target back there, this was like an old horse pasture at one point in time. It's not a very big area by any means, but it lays out, it's all hillside, but it lays out where it faces the south, so it gets decent sun, but the bottom half of it's covered in some lower quality trees that the previous landowner had mowed around forever. So it's all grasses, cool season grasses, and a lot of invasive seedlings that pop up underneath the trees that are back there. There's a giant cottonwood right in the middle of that opening, and the birds love those cottonwoods. So any invasive seed that they eat, they sit up in that tree and poop it out. You could tell. I mean, any given time, you can go out there and I can identify 4 to 6 different invasive shrubs trying to grow directly underneath that tree. But I've been slowly going out there and cutting down a couple trees every week around the edges of it. I'm trying to peel back the edge. Most of it's invasive buckthorn around the edges, but there's some crowded walnuts and a lot of young cherry trees that are not super healthy, couple elm trees in there. And it's just interesting. I'll fell those trees and come back 24, 36 hours later and see what the deer fed on first. That's the main reason I'm doing it right now, is giving the deer something to feed on. And they definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, prefer to browse on elm, the buds on elm trees, over walnut, black cherry, box elder, and buckthorn, because I cut all of them down at the same time and they went straight for the elm.
That's it's pretty crazy when you look at your Instagram how quickly they move in.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, that night that I cut a couple down, it's on a client property with my brother all day doing some bedding area work there. And when I got home, I went behind my house and cut down a handful of trees in another bedding area that I'm trying to get more sunlight into. And yeah, within 30 minutes of me leaving there with the chainsaw, those deer were in there browsing on those buds. But they're hungry. I mean, this time of year they're starved for browse in a bad way. So it's good to feed them. But it's funny, I was that night I was trying, my forearms were sore, right? I probably run a chainsaw at least one day a week throughout the winter and even in the summertime, just doing little things here or there. But now I've kind of come back into that time where I'll run it for like a full day. And this client property that my brother and I were on, the snow, of course, we didn't have a whole lot of snow for 2 weeks. And then the day that I'm scheduled to be out on that property, it snows a foot the night before. So we couldn't,
Yeah.
we couldn't even drive into this location, had to park on the highway 400 yards from the driveway and then hike down in and then hike another mile back into this property to get to where this bedding area is because we couldn't take an ATV. The snow was too deep. So that was interesting, but hiking all the way back in there, running a chainsaw all day and coming home at night, I felt great. I mean, it's one of those things that running a chainsaw is one of the very few things that you can do that will beat you up in the worst way, but make you feel great when you're done, but then make you pay for it again the next day. Right. So
That's a crazy feeling. It's weird.
I was trying to, at dinner that night, I was trying to explain to my 5-year-old son what it's like running a chainsaw. And I was trying to do so in a, very G-rated way. And so I was like, in modern human society, it's one of the most, I was trying not to say like masculine things that you can do, but I was trying to explain like the feeling that you get when you're running a chainsaw. And I was like, and again, I'm trying to say this to a 5-year-old. So I'm like, imagine that you're wrestling with a tiger, a really, really angry tiger, right? You grab a hold of this tiger and you get this thing so mad, but you're controlling him and you use this tiger to cut a tree down. At any given time, if you're not paying attention at how you're handling that angry tiger, it could take your leg off, it could kick back and tear your face off, or the tree that you cut down might fall. And while you're still holding on to this angry tiger, you have to get away from this tree so that you don't get smashed by the tree. And I like trying to explain this to this kid. He's just like, whoa, okay. And all I really wanted to say was there's nothing more badass. There's no feeling more badass than running a chainsaw. There really isn't, in my opinion, right? I mean, when you've got a hold of that thing with all that power and it's just eating.
Like until I get it pinched and I'm an idiot and I hate myself.
Yeah. Well, I'd do that a fair share too. It's like you're trying to do something,
Just
in
a
your head
little
that
bit more, just a little
exactly.
bit more.
Yeah. Well,
Idiot.
I bought one of these electric chainsaws and
Which kind?
Milwaukee, because I've got all Milwaukee power tools, but actually DeWalt's sending me a handful of their saws to test out for that habitat camp. And they work really well. I mean, I use it around my house frequently. It's nice to have in the truck for short little jobs. When you have two guys and you're feathering an edge, it's really nice because it's just, a lot of times we're hinging some of those trees or felling them and directing them. So it's nice to be able to communicate. It's not loud. I can go in my backyard, cut down a few trees without stirring up the whole neighborhood. So I like it, but
I got a DeWalt one now. I haven't used it yet though.
they're nice for sure. I mean, that
Like
the
a little
problem is,
12-inch one.
yeah, this one, I think mine has a 14-inch bar. But they're nice, but they're very Mickey Mouse compared to a regular chainsaw. So when you're cutting down a bigger tree or something, you need that power, that little thing, and just like, all of a sudden you get in there and it's working a little bit too hard and you can feel it. And you can't, that's the one thing with a regular chainsaw. When you run it enough, you kind of can feel when it hits that resistance. We're like, okay, that's enough. I got to get out of here. With this little thing, it's just like all or nothing. And then all of a sudden it's pinched and you can't do anything. So
it seemed to me like a good purchase to attack buckthorn with.
Yes, absolutely. They work very well for small things like that. And they run a long time, honestly, on a battery. I mean, I cut down, well, that video I threw up on Instagram where I felled those trees and those deer came in. I put the trail cams over them, let them browse. Um, I mean, I cut down 4 or 5 larger trees. I mean, not giant trees, but 10, 12-inch diameter trees with that. Cut those up into a couple different chunks, cut some of the bigger limbs off to lay them down on the ground. So it was all within deer's reach. And the battery only went down 1 bar in that whole time. So I
Wow.
was impressed with that. Once you start doing a lot of those bigger trees, obviously it chews up faster. But I don't know. I hiked all the way to the back into that property with that electric chainsaw and 3 batteries for it. And then my brother carried his saw and a can of gas. So it's kind of a test. It's like, which one's going to be more efficient, knowing that we would use the big saw for the bigger trees and the small saw for the smaller trees. But the gas powered saw was definitely more efficient in that situation because
Yeah.
you're limited on what you can cut with a smaller saw,
But don't you
carrying all
think
those
too that
batteries.
the electric one would be better off for someone who hasn't done it before? Like a more beginner?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to control it. I mean, because there's a that power stroke cycle of a gas saw takes a little bit of getting used to.
Yeah.
It's like when you hit the gas on your car, it dogs down just a little bit before it accelerates unless you feather it in just right. And that's the same with the chainsaw. Whereas the electric one, it's really no different than running like an electric mixer in your kitchen, right? The harder you pull the trigger, the faster it spins, at least with some mixers, but or a drill, maybe is a better analogy that you can feather that trigger on the drill and it spins slower and faster. It's the same with that chainsaw for the most part. But so yeah, I mean, I would definitely suggest it to someone for sure, any homeowner that wants a reliable tool for the backyard, cleaning up stuff or trimming trees here or there, then yeah, it's good to go. And again, I do like it on some of those habitat projects where there's 2 guys. One guy's got a hook pulling a tree one way or pushing it, whatever it might be, and you got a smaller, less angry tiger like of a saw in there. But
I actually thought too, for people putting up box blinds and building up platforms, it'd be nicer just to have that than
then
because
a
usually we bring a gas
circular
powered
saw or
one for
something.
everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Well,
for
and you're
sure.
out when you're out in the field, like we always was just bring a gas one,
Yeah.
but the normal steel. But those little things would actually work out well. Plus, you have all the batteries there.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. They're very convenient for sure. But man, it's interesting like how your forearms feel the next day after you run a chainsaw for a few hours one
Whole
day.
body gets attacked because, well, then you're also like, I always just feel so weird and like messed up from it. Like, 'cause you're so, you're usually sweating a lot. It's out in the cold. And then whenever you do that too, you come home and you get in like to a warm house and you're like, oh, am I like messed up in the
Oh,
head? And then your body is super tired and you feel it
yeah.
everywhere.
I guess I didn't feel that as much. I know what you're saying though, because I've been there before. But yeah, it's an all
You get
body
good sweat going
workout.
in the cold. It's
Yeah,
weird.
it
Yeah.
is weird. And well, our big thing was we were trimming these trees is a very sharp ridge line that came out. A really cool bedding area, buck bedding specifically, and then we're going to layer in doe bedding areas above and below it, and there's food plots above and below. So it sits really nicely in that whole layout and how those deer flow. But you're on the end of this very sharp ridge line. We're trying to get sunlight into this bedding area to promote regeneration. So really, all we had to do, because that topography, how it lays out with that southern exposure, we just really had to open up that southern facing slope to get that light in there, right? But easier said than done, trying to stand on a steep hillside in a foot of slippery snow and run a chainsaw, and again be able to make sure you have good footing to, one, not chew your own leg off, and two, be able to get away when that tree starts to go down and stuff starts going flying all over the place. So it was
We were really
interesting.
close to great chainsaw and like work in the woods time if we'd have held off that snow.
Yeah, if it would have just
That's
gotten
my favorite.
cold and not
My favorite
snowed.
time is March
Yeah.
because if we get melt and then those frozen mornings, it's pretty much. I think that's the best time.
No,
Plus,
I
all your deer have hopefully shed by then. You're not blowing them out.
yeah. No, I 100% agree. And they need that food then too, because there's not a whole lot left for them to eat. I mean, I'd say late February into March is probably the hardest time of the year for those deer.
Yeah, for sure.
So, especially like,
Even April's sneaky. I mean, think about it. There's not much stuff going on in April either, unless stuff starts growing.
yeah,
They still got a hard month ahead of them.
for sure. For sure. I've got a hard month ahead of me.
Bathroom
Oh, yeah.
break quick.
All right. Oh, I was just gonna tell you after your potty break, you see this? This is my thing. I'm trying this out. Trying to get more salt in my diet. I'm drinking water
Oh
because I drink
yeah.
water all day and I just pee all the time. And it's actually been working the last couple of days. I just take a couple little chunks of sea salt, let them dissolve in my tongue before I just drink like a half a glass of water at a crack. And I probably pee half as much. It's like night and day
Hmm.
difference because it allows your body to actually hydrate more instead of just pushing that water through. The moisture, the water actually gets into the cells.
Yeah, it's like the same theory as drink some Gatorade and then pound water.
Yeah, exactly. So, but no, I've got so much stuff coming up this month. It's all good, exciting stuff. It's just like you said, this time of year is your favorite time of the year to be out doing stuff in the woods, and same with me. And I've got all these projects underway that I try to milk them out until the very last minute. Like I want to do as much of them as possible, but now I'm at the point where my schedule got so full that I'm going to have to have other people do those projects for me. So instead of me doing all the work, then I show up for a day and get someone started and then, basically project manage it. But anyone listening, if you're in Iowa this weekend, I'll be at the Iowa Deer Classic. That's kind of the start of my show season. And I'm doing a couple seminars there on holistic land management. Uh, it'll be interesting because my opening line is, "My name is Thomas Milsda, and I think whitetail land management is a bad practice, and whitetail consulting is a joke." Something about that. That's not
But I'm a
it
whitetail. I'm
verbatim,
a
but
white.
also I'm a whitetail
Yeah,
consultant.
I'm a whitetail consultant.
Yeah, I mean,
That's good.
I'm pretty open about it. And again, it's kind of the same premise of this podcast, just trying to bring some awareness to these situations and get people to understand that, with the holistic approach, it's like we need to be utilizing our land efficiently across the board. We can't have land that's completely exploited and land that's left unmanaged, untouched. There has to be that balance, or else, ultimately both of those ecosystems suffer. So that's ultimately the message I'm trying to get across with that. But it'll be good. It's always fun. Have you ever been to that show?
Nope, I've never been
I
to
would.
Iowa one.
The Iowa Deer Classic is insane. A lot of people there. A lot of people there. And man, last year it was nonstop. A lot of great conversations. So again, if you guys are listening, stop by and say hi. I think I'm in booth A038. It's steady flow of people, but it's a good time. So it'll be fun. And then I've got that habitat camp the weekend after, and then the weekend after that's my daughter's birthday, and then the weekend after that I've got the Wisconsin open season sportsman's show in Wisconsin Dells, and then the weekend after that is the Illinois Deer Classic.
So is that the Wisconsin Dells one take over the Deer Expo?
Yes, I think they're
Hmm.
actually bringing the Deer and Turkey Expo back. I don't know if this is their first year with it, but they I think they sold the model to someone else, some other marketing or promotional company, and they were going to bring it back. But that's actually this weekend, I think. Memory serves me correctly. They were both the same weekend, so I had to choose between that or the Iowa Deer Classic. But the
Well,
Iowa
that's
Deer
not very
Classic's a
smart.
good show. Yeah, no, it's definitely not for them. I mean, the Deer Classic's the biggest show in the country,
It
probably one of
used to
them.
be always that last weekend of March and first weekend of April range.
Yeah, yeah. But no, I'm excited, but I'm not excited for the next month. It's just a lot of running around, but a lot of cool
Well,
projects coming up this spring
it's
too.
kind of a good month for that. I mean, honestly, yeah, it's a fun time to be out in the woods just because we feel like hermits locked in cages, but it really is, there's more productive things to be done in April. April's kind of better.
Yeah, no, I
And we
agree.
still could deal with some bad weather.
So are you frost seed a lot?
I'm a pretty big believer in it now. I just think, especially when you take into account the cost of machinery and the amount of time, like it just is not a small task to plant 4 acres with a drill, even like. And then at one point, our plan was more like 8 to 9, and it's so much time.
So what are you primarily frost seeding in? Clover?
Well, I'll be frost seeding, into our perennial pastures, so the areas that need help, and that'll mainly just be perennial rye and then red clover and some other, I don't know, probably like chicory, with the idea that the rye takes over.
Does the rye frost seed well? Is that perennial?
It's
How big is
just
the
it's
seed
just
on
it's a
that
little bit
rye?
smaller. It's smaller than like what fescue is. It's not
Okay.
it's not like the small circle like what Timothy is. And I'll probably do Timothy with that mix too, because it
I
seems to have
just
worked well.
I just don't want anyone listening to this to think that they can frost seed like a spring rye or a winter rye because that significantly bigger seed that I guess I've
Well, this
never
is a
tried to
perennial.
frost
This is
seed
a
it.
perennial rye grass.
Yeah, yep. I'm just
It's
saying
considered
you
like
don't want to
it's
stick that
perennial.
out there. Something's gonna eat
No,
it.
that's yeah. It's perennial rye grass is like, it's a smaller seed, and it's also just considered like the most easily germinating seed there is, especially for pasture mixes. Um, but it's not like the best grass either for forage.
Yeah.
But it shoots up and it fills in holes and spots. Plus, it does all right with other things like red clover and, if we do chicory, because it's long, narrow growing, versus like fescue is more of a spider web cover across the field type planting. Um, but I think I'm gonna try. Chicory has done really well on our property, and do more of a biannual plan too. So a couple of the food plots that were more an annual production, maybe plant in a biannual um, mix of clover and some of the other things like chicory that have done really well. Other things I had success with, you know, in that realm would be hairy vetch, cool season biannual that I had a lot of luck with actually.
Frost seeding
Doesn't
specifically.
Yeah, I had luck with hairy vetch, just broadcasting into existing forage actually.
Hmm. Yeah, I want to add that to my food plot mixes. Just trying to decide if it makes sense to have that. I mean, I think it makes most sense to have it in the fall blend because then it comes back the next spring, right? And then
Well, yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of how it really, because I planted the main stuff I planted that I noticed I planted in a spring. Um, I did not get back the next year completely. There's some spots of it, but not like chicory. Chicory seems to be, chicory and red clover do really well. And they come back, you like legit don't need to seed that for 2 years.
yeah, I don't know. I probably won't frost seed any food plots this year because most of them are in rotation with a warm season cover and a fall cover, so they already have a biannual base of clover or an annual clover, um, and rye.
I'll probably I have some crimson clover I would include with that. Crimson's a nice small seed. And then I won't do like the oats and barley and bigger seeds, anything bigger than like a soybean.
Well, what are your tips for frost seeding? Do you have any tips?
Well, it's pretty simple. You literally just go drive out and seed.
you you
I
don't
think I
increase
think
you don't,
it's
do you follow any specific seed rate?
I go off of whatever the seed rate is for that seed. So I literally build all my mixes on the green cover seed smart mix, and then I kind of rely on that, and it seemed to serve me pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just not to try to frost seed big seeds that are going to rot in the before they actually hit temperature. I mean, the big thing is seeds that'll germinate in cool temperatures, right? Because your beans and corn and stuff like that, you absolutely cannot frost seed those. They'll sit there and basically rot or be consumed by some animal before they hit the soil temp of 60 degrees to actually germinate. So,
or they don't actually get down into the ground.
or they don't get down on the ground. Well, I mean, even corn will germinate on top of the ground. It just won't grow real well, or at all. But I've broadcast a lot of beans in my day. They'll grow pretty easily, but not,
I
definitely not
have I
frost
have
seeders.
never broadcasted soybeans.
Really?
Oh, I shouldn't say that. I did kind of overseed. I broadcasted like overseeded some before. I didn't really notice anything from it.
Hmm.
No, I always managed to find a drill and drill those.
Yeah, that's the best thing to do for sure. You don't have
Because
to.
you're more concerned about like, and that's kind of what I've always done, is you're more concerned about the size of the seed. Although it seems like a lot of people would say alfalfa doesn't frost seed well, but I actually have got it to work. I wouldn't say it's probably as good as what you'd want, but
It's very similar to clover. Is it just a lower germination rate and cool temps, or
I
does it
think
not
so.
handle? Yeah.
Well, and it's such a, that's a monoculture type planting. So if all the information you get on that is probably, and it's an expensive seed. So if you do lose any, people don't. I think I find that more with the direction from like professionals is obviously these food plot seed companies are the same way. Like they don't want you, if your plot doesn't turn out good, you're mad at them. So they're telling you the methods to just make sure that it looks good. To me, I'm like, I think it's, especially if you're trying to plant into things without herbicide and tillage, it's just the easiest way and the cheapest way. If you have access to a drill, then that is the best way for sure. But if I'm refusing to till or spray, your best shot is the frost seed.
Yeah, it just depends on what your target crop is, right? Because my rotation will be planting a summer cover crop. You can't frost seed that in because it requires warmer temperatures to germinate. And most of
Yeah.
the seeds
But
aren't going to
like,
do well sitting out there in the cold for a month and a
and
half
there are
or
a
two
lot of big
months.
seeds. There are a lot of big
Yes.
seeds.
Yeah, exactly.
But think about all the clover plots that have to get, just topped off or replanted, or you're planting a clover plot on an annual. So like the one field we're going to go at and do more biannual and clover, that's been an annual production. Is there a better time than for frost seeding? And how much, especially when I see, as well as clover does, like especially red clover, white clover, like it has to be one of the easiest things to grow in the world. Like you do not need to till for that. You do not
No,
need it.
definitely not.
It does. Red clover does so well everywhere, I think.
Yeah. And white does too. I don't know that I've ever planted it and had issues with it. I planted white clover along my driveway. I got rid of some lawn and put it into clover, and it's directly under a bunch of walnut trees, which are allelopathic, right? So they're choking out
Yeah.
most of everything underneath them, but the clover is still growing. It's not as lush as it could be by any means, but it's there and it's growing. So it can tolerate a lot. But yeah, no, frost seeding's, that's a great way to get stuff in the ground. And like we were talking about earlier, frost seeding switchgrass in the ground is a great way to do it if you have a good seed bank where you're going to get seed to soil contact. Now, I've seen videos from certain outdoor consultants uh, talking about frost seeding and recommending not frost seeding on top of snow. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that would be more just a bird consumption issue, wouldn't it?
I think that their big argument was the snow's going to melt and all the seed's going to wash away with it. But
Well,
when the
that'd be a
snow does,
problem with your field.
yeah, Very much so.
Now we need to talk about your water infiltration issues, not the snow issue.
Well, that's exactly it, because that snow, you know, as it melts, it's not running off, it's not shedding off the top layer, it's trickling down into the rest of the snow, and a lot of times that'll pull that seed down into it. So no, that's my mindset. I've frost seed on top of snow quite frequently. When I was doing a lot more frost seeding, I'd put it on top of the snow. So I mean, obviously I'm not going out, and I think your biggest issue would be if you had like a layer of that rotten snow, you know, where it had melted significantly, created a snowpack, and then refroze, and then you got powder on top of that. That might be
Yeah,
more likely to cause an
like
issue. But
I don't know. I can't say that I've done it on top of snow a lot. I've had a lot of success with it, and I think, and especially with clovers, like I'm amazed by what red clover and white clover does by being frost seeded. And I would go and this year I'm gonna try more. Now I'm looking through this list on green cover. Like I did see some good results from Alsite clover. I did see yellow blossom sweet clover. I don't know if I frost seeded that successfully or not. I feel like that's a more warm season
is that
type
an annual?
clover.
Is that an annual clover?
Yeah, I think so. I think Alsike is too. But they're also the kind of things that filled in, and they did kind of help, you know, because I think red clover's strongest time is that second spring. And you know, hairy vetch takes a little bit longer to grit. Like it seems really strong towards the end of the year. I don't know. It's just I think adding in some annuals with it too. Like I want to add in annual ryegrass to my the if I'm going to do just a strict cool season frost seed for grazing too. So I might do that where I just frost seed some grazing cover crop fields with the idea of grazing it hard. And, you know, I could graze that first growth in June and just do late June and then broadcast in sorghum with it. Because all these things that I'm talking about actually have shown pretty good regrowth as well after being grazed. Sorghum's the only one that, you know, I think it makes sense to wait and seed it when, you know, I think of sorghum, and I could be wrong, you could correct me on it, but I think of sorghum like corn and soybeans, where you want to plant it with that soil temperature at the right spot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's warm season for sure.
But sorghum's a nice thing to plant. It's not a bad thing to broadcast as long as you're grazing and you have access to some ground, like where you think that seed, because it's a small seed, if that thing has a chance of getting down in there, I think sorghum's going to grow. Sorghum is an impressive plant.
It'll
As far as
outcompete
seeding it. Well, I think what is it competing? Like
whatever's already established is what it's competing
right,
with,
but
right?
it grows so vertical.
Yeah.
You know, hairy vetch will stem out and like it's like a spider web, but you don't see that until later in the summer by the time sorghum got up ahead of it, even if you plant it in June.
Well,
you know, red clover can kind of be like that too, but when you graze red clover gets knocked down. Red clover is like a mat on the ground. I think it's a perfect thing to kind of try to broadcast something into, and then sorghum hopefully can shoot up, you know, before the red clover gets super high.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably do well. Okay, so in that area that you're broadcasting this into, how long are you grazing cattle in any one of those areas prior to removing them? A day? I mean,
well, this field I actually have it set up to where we do you know, 4 moves a day.
okay. So this field, how long does it take for you to get from the time you first put cattle in the first paddock within this field to the time you remove the cattle from the last paddock of the field? How long is that duration?
Well, that's obviously all dependent on your stocking rate, but you know, this
I'm
situation
just
would be about
you
3
specifically.
days.
3 days. Okay.
3 to 4 days. And then
So what this follows, I mean, the same exact model that I'm doing with these cattle integrated food plots, right? So when that crop is standing before anything's smashed down, you know, the majority of your stems are vertical. I go
that's when you
broadcast
broadcast.
broadcast into it, and then those cattle are in there for a few days, and as they're grazing, they're integrating that seed down into the soil, and then they're out right as those seeds are germinating. And that also, there's that balance where the existing stand is stunted. It'll sit for like a few days before it doesn't
7 to
really,
10 days.
yeah, it doesn't really do anything. And then all of a sudden you get
Nothing.
that rainfall or whatever, and everything turns lush and green again. So that's your target time, right? If you get that sorghum where it has a few days head start, then yeah, it's definitely going to take off. I mean, you could
Well,
get,
it's also you're timing it where if you plant it middle of June, that sorghum, once similar to what we talked about with switchgrass, it outworks all of those cool season legumes that you planted. It beats the shit out of them.
yeah,
Sorghum goes off. Sorghum's just waiting for July and August. It does nothing early in the spring. There's been multiple times where it's like, oh shit, the sorghum didn't take off. And then if you just wait until like July 4th, I think you could plant it as late in July 4th and just not even waste your time. I think most of June is a waste for sorghum, because in July and August it goes off. It goes like, this is my time to thrive, and all the other things are like, hey, we're trying to chill out. We don't like this heat. Sorghum's like, that's the point. That is the importance right there of the cool season, warm season mixtures,
yeah,
and the fact that you're planting grasses that are growing more vertical and legumes that are more, spider webbing out.
yeah. I mean, you're maximizing the surface area. You're creating more surface area, right?
Yeah.
That's yeah. No, I like it. I mean, I got to be better this year at actually documenting a lot of these things that we're doing and sharing them, obviously for this podcast, but also just for people, even like us, to kind of learn from those things and look back and fine tune that process. But there's a lot of variables involved, like you said. Obviously, the stocking rate, weather, all those things that come into play. But I think it's a system that's getting overlooked. Not just the grazing and cycling those annual crops through your grazing paddocks like you are, but again, my situation with food plots and utilizing cattle, I mean, chemical free, fertilizer free food plots that actually have very nutrient dense crops in them, you can't beat it. There's just no
Do
way
you
to beat
believe
it.
in the do you believe in the so do you believe in like radishes and turnips, those bulb and collards? We're talking about like the brassicas essentially,
But just
planting
believe
them
in them.
in late season because of uh palatability with deer.
You're talking about the bulbs themselves when it gets cold, the
Yeah.
starches convert to sugars, that
Well, and I've
theory or
heard,
whatever.
I used to always operate around the thought that you didn't want to plant them too early, because if they became too mature and woody, they wouldn't eat them at the right
Yeah,
time.
I agree with that. I mean, I've certainly seen that. I mean, I forget what the date is. I think it actually has a lot to do with the length of the day where
Yeah.
they'll bolt. They send up the shoots to produce
So
flowers
do
and
you
seeds.
think, so here's my question for that. Because I've planted that's probably the one thing that I haven't had as much success with, to see like actual with other competition, the brassicas and in terms and radishes as much. You don't notice it until like this time of the year, because it's the last thing that you see. Like you can see these bulbs in the ground, you're like, damn, oh, I did have some radishes and turnips in here. um but do you think that there's any, like, would that plant go to seed in like July or August and drop seed for the next round?
Um, that I don't know. It will definitely go to seed. I don't know if that seed would be viable for another round that season or not.
Yeah,
That'd be interesting to test out.
because that's one thing I do think I think it has a hard time because of how much area it takes up competing with these other plants that I've planted with it. They're definitely there, and I think maybe they also need just a little bit more help as far as nutrient places, because the places where we've had bales, they've done amazing. They have these giant bulbs. That could just be the biggest part of all this. Like we've talked about, like if I cut this place off cold turkey with fertilizer, the places that do the things that I want them to do had bales on them. Like it's literally that simple. Like there's a spot in the food plot right now that we have, and it was just where the last bale of the spring was fed. Like I remember it perfectly, the exact spot, because I watched it all season. And the amount that spot, like I went out there last week. It is literally all green forage. There's giant bulbs in there. It's like, so now we're gonna see it with the whole field covered, because
Well, I
I've just
mean,
pounded the shit out of
it
it.
it just proves that whole concept of how life promotes life, right? It's like you increase that soil biology and it increases the life and the
Well, and
biology
could
and
you
everything
imagine if it's
around
that
it.
simple? It's that
Yeah.
simple that we just feed hay on the ground, and like I'm sure there's more of a, because you could get way more technical about it. Like I only want to feed this amount of pounds of hay on this amount of acreage. I want to make sure, then you have the difference between, am I going to roll it out or am I going to just bale graze it? But if it's that simple, where a farmer could just graze these annual crop fields and eliminate their fertilizer bill, and then use the thing that they're already paying for, most likely with the animals that they have in a shed somewhere.
Yeah. What's in your hay? Is it a alfalfa grass mix? Is that
Yeah, I mean, usually I try to get, um, right now I'm pretty much just buying cheap hay, with some, hopefully they have some alfalfa in it. And then I kind of like save those alfalfa bales. Right now they're getting a lot of alfalfa bales. And then I feed them more of that cheaper grass hay earlier in the year.
yeah, I've
The big thing I'm worried about with that is there, because you start reading more about it, like, and it shows too with the herbicide and insecticide and pesticide, how much residue
is in
carries
that
over in
hay.
that hay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's some areas, there's a couple bales that I remember where, from the first year, that did not do much. It was almost like a dead spot. It's like, whoa, whoa. But I know I had like 6 bales last winter where I think it was just like the most like monoculture, hard chemical, kind of like aggressive hay operation, because I just got cheap bales. And like once the animals had eaten a different bale, they refused to eat these like 3 bales. So I knew exactly where they were. And then ended up getting cleaned up through the grazing year by the new round of steers. But the old animals, they had eaten the first one perfectly fine. But then I had given them access to a better bale and they would literally refuse to touch it. And those
Can't blame them.
spots were almost like dead spots. Yeah, it was like, Jesus. So
Yeah.
I try to get, obviously I think all of my hay this year was organic, which helps. I know that's not happening there, but you get some weeds from it. But
It's funny.
it is what it is.
I saw a video on Instagram a few weeks ago. I'm not going to mention names. I'm not here to sling mud or throw drag anyone down or anything, but it was a video from a famous influencer in the outdoor world, and he was talking about one of the many things he does to, like, next level things that he does to get his whitetails through the winter to ensure that they're thriving and producing the biggest, best antlers they possibly can, right? So his thing was, in the wintertime, he goes out and he puts a couple straw bales out on the south facing slopes in his red cedar thickets, so that those bucks can come and bed down on that straw and keep their body up off the cold ground, and reduces their stress and makes their life so much better. And I just, I had to laugh. I mean, I know without a shadow of a doubt, those deer definitely bed in that stuff and will enjoy it. But it's like, one, are you actually benefiting the deer by doing that? And two, is there actually other potential side effects from doing that? You know, first, when I'm looking at his bedding area to begin with, he could significantly improve it by converting it from the cool season grasses and eastern red cedars to more warm season grasses, less red cedars, more sunlight in there to begin with. A lot of people, I think, confuse good thermal bedding. They think that pine trees or even cedar thickets are good thermal bedding, but if that sunlight's not reaching the ground, then they're not warming their body up. It's not really good cold weather thermal bedding. But I saw the video and he's doing that. I'm like, yeah, if you just focus on managing that area for native warm season grasses, they'd have something nice to lay on. They'd have good cover. It'd be a lot better all around. And then I was like, well, he was touting this as a cheap option to reduce stress on your deer at, only $6 for a straw bale. Like, well,
A
if you're not,
square bale, that's an expensive one too.
yeah, well, it is expensive. But the
It ain't
thought
gonna
that I
go
had
very
is
far.
exactly what you said about the pesticide or herbicide transfer. Unless he's buying organic straw, there's a real good chance that that straw was sprayed and desiccated with an herbicide. So it was actually killed with an herbicide before harvest. So it was relatively fresh. So he's carrying that into his soil. And if he's buying organic straw, which I doubt he was, then there's, more of a likelihood that there might be some weed seeds in there that he's carrying. Who knows what kind of weed? Maybe it's a noxious weed, maybe it's a native plant, who knows? But he's bringing that into the environment too. So it's just like my thoughts were, I actually thought about you. I was like, you'd be far better off just dumping a bale of alfalfa out there, put some nitrogen in the soil, congregating the deer and the nutrients, because I know the guy's dumping alfalfa and corn on the ground 100 yards from there anyways, trying to pick up sheds. So I don't know, I
Well,
just
but
found that
straw
funny.
is, I don't know, straw is good organic matter.
For sure. But there's, if you don't have
So
ground cover, it's good. Yeah.
yeah, it's I don't know. I have to see the video too, but a small square bale. The problem is, I think a lot of these hunters, there is weeds in them for sure, and that is an issue. But I think the biology it creates and not having to use fertilizer, I think outweighs it because it's just I don't know. There's gonna be some like you're gonna get some ragweed with your soybean field. Like you
Yeah.
either if you can handle it, but like your brassicas and turnips and radishes and clovers don't seem to be bothered by ragweed,
No, I
you know,
wouldn't
and
I wouldn't worry about ragweed at all unless it's completely
that's what
choking
I
out
got
your
out of
field.
that's what I got most from those bales. You
Yeah.
know, there was a couple bales too that brought in some foxtail, but you ain't hiding from it. It's already there. And
Yeah.
the
Well,
idea
the
is it
ragweed
should,
probably is too.
yeah, the reg for sure. Go let a field just go sit dormant for a year. 90% of what you're going to see is ragweed.
But again, if you have good ground cover already, then you're gonna have a lot more competition. That ragweed's not gonna come in full force either. It might fill a couple holes here or there. So yeah, I wouldn't worry much about that. I just thought it was funny because it's the things that people do for deer. And
I'd
again,
just be
I
curious if they actually used it because I have an alfalfa bale that I put a camera on. That'll be it was like one of our placements of bales out in this area. And I just wanted to see if they ever interacted with it and they didn't. Like literally, I'd never had a deer eat from it.
I mean I
So
know
obviously it wasn't good enough alfalfa or something.
they definitely will. I actually have a friend of mine used to do this all the time. I don't know if he still does, but he called them shed beds, where he would go out and dump a bunch of grassy hay out in his food plots or in the backside of his food plot, and those bucks would come and bed down during the middle of the night, kind of a nighttime bed, and eat some of it, dig around, and then he'd pick up a pile of sheds in there. I
Hmm.
did it one year years ago with this old barn in this valley, and I was trying to get better food plots in there, and the roof had collapsed on part of the barn, so I just started pulling all this rotten hay out of the other end and dumping it on the food plots just to get that organic matter built up in the food plots. And I put a camera over it, and the deer definitely, they would come in there and they tried to pick around, but there really wasn't any food value in there for them, but they would bed down in it every single night.
Huh.
So
Because I was kind of hoping that would happen. Well, like cattle do is they'll pull the hay out and then, make their own bed. I kind of figured that would happen with them too. Plus, they use them as a windbreak. Um, but bales are, I think bales are actually a really interesting tool for the. Now that I use them for what I use them for, I have a lot of interesting like thoughts on how you could use them as a hunter too, just with food plot management. Do you remember if that food plot performed better the next year after doing that?
oh yeah, it absolutely did. Absolutely. 100%.
And right now is the good time to buy hay because go to Facebook Marketplace and all the guys that were trying to sell it all winter and just didn't, and now they have old hay and they're trying to get rid of it before the spring.
Hmm.
Probably not as good of a time as like June and July, but right now is not a bad time. I usually I'll go pick up cheaper hay right now to start me for the next year.
Yeah. No, I just thought it was funny because if you're going to do that route, again, you're going to get a lot more out of it by doing like a hay alfalfa mix or something and putting it on your food plots versus a straw bale in a bedding area. Because
Yeah,
like you said with your cattle, the bale that they didn't eat have essentially choked everything out underneath it, and that's what's going to happen. They're not going to eat the straw, and that straw is not going to break down super quick in an area that has poor biology to begin with. So it's going to be there for a while, and then what's going to happen is it's going to choke out whatever it was on, and it'll probably just end up being a pocket of weeds there when it's all said and done. So that was really the point that I was trying to make with that, I guess. But teach their own. You can do whatever you want with your straw bales. But again, I would definitely assume that any straw you purchase, unless it's actually organic straw, was sprayed with glyphosate to kill it before it was harvested. I mean,
that's crazy the way they do it.
and that's the problem. When you're buying products, food products, wheat products that are non-organic, but they'll say non-GMO, that doesn't necessarily mean they haven't been sprayed, because they spray non-GMO wheat with
Mhm.
herbicide to kill it. And that's why it dies. If it was
Really
GMO,
just
it wouldn't die.
identifying the seed, right? The seed doesn't.
I think so. Yeah, that's all it is. It's just the seed.
Yeah.
The genetic makeup of it is, herbicide resistant in some way. So no, it's interesting. But the shed hunting thing, this time of year always cracks me up with the shed hunting. I mean, I like shed hunting for sure. We went out, took my nephews and my son out last weekend, and we put on some miles and found a couple little dinkers. Nothing crazy, but I just find it funny this time of year. It's like all the people in the outdoors that they're talking about stuff, trying to keep constant content out there, which I totally understand and get at this point in my life. But shed hunting is obviously a big topic right now, and I just think that it's way too overanalyzed. You know, long, lengthy articles on how to be a good shed hunter, all these things. I mean,
Dude, if you can just get an acre of beans standing right now, you'd be in a great spot. It's
well, I
nothing.
mean, that's really all it comes down to, is just having the bucks on your property, right? I mean, if you go out and you walk the major travel corridors, you walk the bedding areas that they're using, and you walk the food sources that they're using, you're gonna find sheds if there's bucks using those areas. So,
But it's
these
also
tips.
completely different. It's completely different than when you're actually hunting them too. Whether or not you want them living, like if they're living there right now, that's not the reason they're living there in October.
Correct. Yeah. So picking up a shed doesn't necessarily equate to being able to kill that deer in the fall.
Not at all.
Very
Not at
rarely.
all.
Very, very
Like,
rarely.
my last 2 years here, and I picked up a million sheds, and all it is a perfect example of, if you have food that can stay standing that long, they have no other choice.
Yeah.
But it was literally in food sources that they did not choose during the year because they were too out in the open.
Oh no. Yeah, you're spot on. Yeah, you're talking about that bean field closer to your house that they left alone.
Yeah, and it was a slam dunk because it was the last thing they would hit, and it just made it that long. Plus, it has, I think part of it does have electric fence around it, so it's not just an easy thing to like walk through for them. But
Yeah. Well, I
it's
mean,
it's and then do
here's
you have
my
bedding in that area for it? Like, it's that simple.
here's my simplified shed hunting tips, right? Go out, walk the areas that deer use this
I
time of year.
mean,
It all focuses around food, right? You have to have
if
a
you
food
see a
source.
food plot with a bunch of shit in it, you're on your
Yes,
right. You're on the right
start
track.
there, backtrack into the bedding areas. That's your best start. If you're not finding sheds, it's because of one thing and one thing only,
They're
because
not
the
there.
bucks are not there. Plain and simple. The does might be there, but the bucks aren't going to be there if
In like
it
that 1 month period too.
correct. And the reason those bucks aren't there, usually three main scenarios, right? First and foremost, again, you might have too many does. If you have a lot of does on your property and the bucks aren't there right now, you have too many does, plain and simple. Those does have outcompeted your bucks for the resources. Those bucks have no choice but to travel for high quality food late in the season because they're so run down from the rut. The does, they can conserve their energy. They shut down their metabolism significantly in the wintertime, a lot more than the bucks do. They conserve their energy. You know, they bed right on or near those food sources. They move very little, and they just outcompete those bucks for the resources at the end of the day. So your first issue is you have too many does. The next thing is you don't have enough or high quality food to begin with, right? And again, the two kind of go hand in hand. So if you want to hold that many does and the bucks, then you have to have a lot more food, plain and simple. Or you can be like the bulk of the properties in Iowa or Illinois where there's just nothing else around. So those deer aren't, they're not necessarily getting high quality food, but you have the highest quality food available, which is all relative at the end of the day, right? And then the last thing is you don't have enough or high quality cover or enough high quality cover. And again, it goes back to those does, because if you have a small pocket that has a bunch of food and some nice cover, and there's not a bunch of does around, which you're going to have does that fill that void. But if there's no does around, then that's a perfect spot for a buck to hang out, right? If it has everything he needs. But when those does start to congregate on these limited resources on your property, they overwhelm those bucks. The bucks aren't going to tolerate it. And also the higher quality resources just run out a lot faster and the bucks are gone. And that's why you're not finding sheds, because you don't have bucks on your property at this point in time. So,
well, and I think the food source just is a way better place for them to drop them too, because they're moving around, they're lowering their head, they're raising their head. I don't know. Of all the sheds that I found on this property over the last couple of years, probably 3 of the 30 came from bedding areas,
yeah,
and it was more of access lanes coming to and from.
I'd say I'm probably sitting at 50-50. I find them in the
50-50. Yeah.
50-50.
Well, but part of my thought process on that too is I don't think they were full. Like, I don't know how much they were actually betting on my property.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's exactly it. Is if you're only working with half of the pieces to the puzzle, then you're never going to really know. But to your point, picking up a shed in one spot is not going to tell you where to kill that deer the next fall, unless I would say this: if it's on a big chunk of public land where there's really no ag fields around and you're truly identifying those browsy food sources that those deer need in the wintertime, and those nice secure bedding locations that they're really seeking out when the pressure's on, that's a completely different story. But when it comes down to the private land game where they're just, how'd you describe it last week or a couple weeks ago, how they kind of move through those areas and just mob graze essentially all the food in that spot and then move on. It's just really the timing.
Well, their mindset right now is survival. They're in a different way. Like, they just need to eat, and they haven't experienced any hunting pressure. They haven't been shot at for a couple months. They're in a completely different mindset than they are 3 or 4 months ago. And that mindset isn't exactly like, it's just, if you think that the shed that drops on that food plot is gonna be if anything, maybe your late season food source, maybe you're on the right track there. We're talking like December, January, because
but even then it's so hard to know, because from your late season hunting December into January, I mean, I guess it depends on where you are, but most of our deer start dropping mid to late February into March, and you'll have a few select bucks that drop earlier than that. But no, it's just not a lot of valuable information. It's just nice to pick up the sheds, obviously. Now,
what was an example of someone that like was going crazy with it?
Well, again, I don't want to name names, but
what was their example of what they were saying?
It was I don't know if it was an article or a post or a podcast that he did about it, talking about shed hunting at variable speeds, like moving faster through some areas and slower through other areas, which it all makes perfect sense. I mean, again, it's like, this is how I kind of try to explain it to clients on how deer move. I mean, cover, especially mature bucks, right? They're going to utilize cover as much as possible. And when you have open timber, they're going to move more quickly through open areas than they would in a more confined area with better cover. So typically when you're looking at timber in general, if you have a thick area, it's going to be a bedding area where they spend more time either bedding or browsing. And if it's more open area, generally it's more of a transition area or travel corridor that they're just cutting through from point A to point B. So I don't know entirely, because I didn't actually listen to the whole conversation, but I'm assuming he was just talking about, when you're in those transition areas where those deer are probably just following one or two trails, there's no food sources around, there's no bedding locations, then move more quickly through those areas and focus on the areas that deer are spending more time. Slow down in the food plots where they're out there feeding all night, slow down in the bedding areas where they're in there bedding and browsing all day, which makes perfect sense. But again, it's just like, I don't know. I just saw he had a video talking about how some people had like called him out on it. And like, it's kind of one of those things where maybe you're just stating the obvious, maybe, or
Well,
maybe
it's
you
just
did
they're
overanalyze
not
it. And
they're not there. Like before I found all these sheds the last few years here, I went just spring hiking. That's what I call it. Spring hiking, looking for sheds, I guess. But guess what? I didn't find sheds. I think I found like one shed my entire life before I found all of these the last few years. It's just they're not hard to find either if they're there.
no, it comes down to food, but that's where
It comes down to food.
it comes down to
And
food.
if you're
Comes down to
walking a long
habitat.
ways, call it what it is. It's just spring hiking, and you're just
Yeah.
hopefully looking for a shed.
Well, that's where it's very hard to feed your deer through the whole winter off of a food plot. It really is. I mean, in your situation, you basically had an ag field that you left standing in beans, right?
Yeah,
And
an
that's
acre.
and that's where I have a hard
It
time.
only lasts like 2 weeks if they actually decide to eat it.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of where I just have this hard time with these giant food plots of leaving 5-10 acres of standing grain for deer in the wintertime, because they don't really need that standing grain if the rest of the habitat supports them the way it should. If you have a lot of adequate browse in the area, then those deer shouldn't, that standing grain should supplement the browse and
Yeah.
basically just ride them out so that you can pick up sheds or so you can get more late season hunting. But it really, it's great that people do it, but it really shouldn't be the primary food source for those deer going into winter, because you think about all the inputs and the amount of resources that go into producing that crop for what you get out of it. It's not really efficient at the end of the day. Now, I totally understand it. And to be honest with you, as much as we talk about it, as much as I hate corn, you're going to laugh at this. I actually put together a corn blend for next year that I'm going to test out that mimics. I kind of mixed up some warm season grains and planted it years ago. Actually, the last time I planted corn in a food plot, and I picked up the most sheds I had ever picked up and had a lot of good deer on camera late in the season. And with how things went this last year, how, normally our farm just gets torn apart during gun season. The whole area does. And it's hard to even see a mature buck after that. But this year, things went fairly well. And literally 2 days after gun season, I was getting pictures of all my mature bucks on food plots again, and I just ran out of food. It also doesn't help that the neighbor's horses spent the better part of January in my food plot. Actually, I think maybe it was December, in one of my food plots, and just absolutely demolished it. Like 4 or 5 quarter horses in a food plot destroyed it. But the corn thing, I think, is promising. It's I'm doing a 85-day corn, so a short season corn, and it's non-GMO. And so that's the big thing, is making sure that we have a good fall crop so that we can roll that down and plant corn into it in June, when the rye primarily has matured, so that rolls down and crimps easily but creates a good thatch layer so we don't have the weed competition. Plant that in June, and then it's a well balanced blend that isn't just going to suck all the nitrogen out of the soil and end up with a pile of carbon on top. So I'm excited.
What all you planting with it?
I could pull up the list here quick. Give me a second.
Off the top of my head, I would plant peas. I'd plant hairy vetch with it.
Well, see, I want hairy vetch with it, but here's the problem: is we're drilling it in, and sorry, I'm trying to multitask.
I'd drill in the hairy vetch with it.
But isn't it going to be too deep? Because the corn's got to be drilled in at like 1.5 inches deep.
Nope. I drilled sorghum and hairy vetch together
How
with
deep
the same exact Same
How,
exact depth I did corn.
like an inch and a half,
Mm-hmm.
and it did
Oh,
well.
yeah, I did really well.
Well, that's good to know because that was the only barrier holding me back. But no, we've got forage soybeans, chickpeas, open pollinated corn, trophy rapeseed, buckwheat, black oil sunflower, and sorghum.
Nice.
So I'm excited. Like again, this is it's there's a couple things in there. I didn't do sunflower back when I was doing these blends before, and I didn't do chickpeas, but I did more soybeans, some rapeseed, buckwheat, and then corn. And that's the most sheds I've ever picked up because it held those deer around. But again, it wouldn't last that long if the habitat wasn't that good. And in this particular area, it doesn't hunt real well during the fall because there's a lot of commotion there. But once the commotion dies down, back to what you were saying with your soybean fields, like that pressure holds those deer out of that area. And then when that pressure is gone, then they kind of funnel back in and it kind of leaves more food sources available for them late in the season. So it worked out well. But
That's what all the hunters should do. They should the food plot next to the hunting shack that you don't see deer at during hunting season because you're there too much. You should plant with this stuff, and
that's honestly like
that'll be your shed. That'll be your
the
shed plot.
the bulk of the plans that I put together. If there's a food plot near the hunting cabin or the house or something, that's the late season plot. I mean, like my house here, it's like when
Yeah,
they get hungry, as long as you have screened access from that, so let's plant some conifers and create a hard wall to isolate your property or your living quarters from that food source. And that's where you want to put your late season standing grains. You don't want to put it deep into your property and have to access your whole property to get there because every deer is going to blow out of there and they'll just come back and feed in the middle of the
well, they
night.
just won't make it either.
Correct.
It
So
is a funny thing about the people that put up the hot wire because I don't see soybeans and corn being a high attracted in October and even early November. So
no,
it's like, what is the point of doing that? It's very predictable when they become super attractive because they don't make it. If they are too concealed with cover, they're just not going to make it. They're going to wipe them out when they're immature.
yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I'm excited for this blend. It's going to be interesting and it's going to benefit more than just the deer too, which is nice. There's a lot of pollinator stuff in there. And
Sunflowers are always a awesome thing to include. Them, man, those things are just so awesome when you get one that actually go up and bloom out.
yeah, they're beautiful. And the birds love them. Turkeys love them. And the nice thing too is it's a short maturity group of seeds in there. So I'll go into it in the fall and either probably broadcast into it a fall blend. So you still have more of the cool season annuals and then that cover crop going through the winter, or maybe even just drill it in some situations and then just sacrifice knocking some of that corn down. But either way, it gives another option and it's not that terribly expensive, all things considered. So stay tuned. I'll get you some more info
I'll
on
plant
that.
that.
I'll get you some info and I'll just order some extra bags for you. How about that?
Okay. 1 acre.
1 acre, 42 pounds per acre is the seed rate I have on it. So that's not too bad.
That's pretty similar to soybeans. Soybeans, I usually 50 pounds.
Yep. Yeah, and I think because the ratio is only can't remember off the top of my head. I'm looking at the list, but I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think there's only like 30 to 35% of the ratio is corn. So I think I can still plant it with that drill that's got 7-inch rows and it'll be spread out enough that you're not crowding anything too much, which is nice. Because then you don't have to go through and plug that Genesis drill and do 14 or 21-inch rows. So it'll, and the key there is to make sure that you have close enough rows so you have good ground cover, or else all you're doing is asking for weeds if you don't have enough ground cover, right? So
that's been my biggest issue because I've only ever used the 2-row corn planter and I did soybeans and corn with it. But yeah, the gaps in between the rows is the biggest issue.
Yeah.
Those newer drills would solve that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I really do want that vetch in there. But you think if you plant the vetch the fall before, Would it
I would plant it with the
would
corn
come
because
back?
as the corn grows, it
It's gonna
grows
climb
up
up the
with it.
corn.
Yeah, dude, it was so cool what it did with sorghum. So it just like it looked like it was literally two plants working together. It was just crazy. And then because you could see where vetch would be where it's by itself in a wide open field, and it's it just kind of covers the ground.
Yeah.
Um, but how high it would get when it's planted with something like that it can climb up. And the sorghum looked good too.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. That's promising. It makes me feel better about adding that stuff in there, but I definitely want that vetch in there. I just was concerned again about because vetch isn't a very big seed and planted too deep and doesn't have the energy to get through.
Gabe Brown says just set your drill to your big seed rate and just let the little seeds fall in behind it.
Yeah.
Because that is a big issue. And I think people get caught up on it, which I agree with. It's hard to imagine how all those little seeds won't fall out.
Yeah.
But it does seem to kind of work out in the end, as long as you're like, because I always just seed it the way I would seed if I was just whatever the recommendations are for corn or soybeans, and then all the other seeds are included with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't had any separation issues with any of our blends so far. And we're usually putting in enough to do a few acres here or there, so they're not bouncing around all day by any means. So I don't see it being a big issue. But the depth rate or the seed depth was my biggest concern with that. But if you've had good experience with that vetch is going in the mix for sure, because I love that stuff in a mix.
Well, it's pretty inexpensive, and if I'm wrong, you can
Blame you.
come
Okay.
at me, because the only theory there would be is if my planter wasn't getting the same depth.
Yeah, I'm for sure gonna do it in the stuff that I plant. I'm not ready to put it on client properties yet until I know that it works.
I always just remember, yeah, for sure. I always just remember, like, it's so hard to get information about what things work well together because there's such little information about it. And then
And
when you
that's
hear
why a
someone
lot of
like
it is.
Gabe Brown be like, just put them all in there.
Yeah, well, that's
Like,
exactly it. Like all those guys, the more and more you follow them, it's just like, yeah, I
yeah,
tried that this year. It didn't really work. I tried that. Or they'll talk about planting like a 20 seed blend 3 or 4 years in a row. And every single year they can identify different seeds in it, but never all of them, right? Or different
yep,
plants growing, where it's like one year this took off, next year it didn't. Next year this, whatever it is. And that's kind of the whole idea behind those blends, is that the soil and the plants kind of work together and figure out what they need. And some plants are going to thrive and other plants aren't. And that's just how it is. But then the world doesn't matter. So, but we should probably wrap things up, huh? We've been at this for a couple hours and I've got to get
yep.
this seminar put together. So, um,
I gotta get outside.
yeah, I need to do that too. Go for a walk.
Well, my tip of the week, or I guess my challenge of the week, whatever you want to call it, is go get your. I think the biggest issue with people frost seeding is they don't get it ready in time. At least that's kind of what happened to me in the past, where it kind of catches up to you, and then sometimes it's just too far gone where it's not really freezing and thawing it anymore. I just think March, especially with the snow melting right now, like it looks to be a pretty good time. So get your blends ready, get the seed bought, because it's also, and I think I understand people doing weekend warrior type plantings. And I get that, but a lot of these things would be solved too if you just timed it with rain. Well,
Yeah.
it's super. And then the same thing with the frost seedings. Like when you see go out there one morning when it's a really hard freeze, it got down to 20 degrees, and you have a couple days where it's going to be 40s and 50s. That's the best time to do that. And then you maybe even get a rain with it or something. That'd be awesome. And then throughout the year, the fall food plots, I couldn't imagine what I used to do where I would just try to time it up on the weekends or my days off to go try to plant it, because now it's just, I need absolute confirmation that it's coming to go throw that seed in August. Because I've been burned too many times where I've tossed seed and then you didn't get rain for 3 weeks and it was just pointless.
Yeah. No, I get it. You're spot on. I mean, timing's everything, right? With all those crops. So,
Well, it's
and
also like working with nature. It's, that
yeah,
rain does a pretty damn good job of driving seed in the ground.
for
Just
sure.
got to time it right.
For sure. No, yeah, that's a good tip. My tip, going into the spring is start planning ahead right now for your summer. I mean, I'm guilty of this all the time. I wait until the last minute, and then I go buy seeds for my garden. Uh, right now is a good time to be ordering chickens. This is when we order our meat birds. So we order them now. And actually this year I'm going to do a couple batches. So I'm going to get an early batch. And then while they are out in the chicken tractors, then I'll get another batch and start brooding them and kind of cycle them through. But
Yeah, I'm gonna do
if
a May 28th and a June. I just ordered them yesterday, like 16th or something delivery.
Yep, that's right around where I'm doing mine too.
Because then I like to be done at the end of summer.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yep. Exactly. So
And don't get them too early. Like you don't want them in April.
Yeah, you don't want to deal with them in the cold.
No.
That they're pretty tough, especially
mistake.
those broiler birds. Their metabolism's through the roof, so they're little hot boxes once they get feathers and can insulate themselves. But yeah, you don't want to deal with that. And what I do this year, I need to build my mobile chicken coop, because what I'll do is I'll take my chickens, my layers right now, move them to that and get them out of the coop entirely, and that becomes a brood house. In previous years, I just split the coop in half, and half's brood house and half's for the other layers. But I'll get those other layers out and get them free ranging more right away in the spring. I'm actually going to I'm going to use them in areas that I've got a lot of buckthorn problems, at least as long as I can before the foxes and hawks try and kill them. But I want to see if they can scratch through that seed bank and either consume and dispose of a lot of those buckthorn seeds, or if they'll just process them and they'll germinate faster, so I can work through that couple generations of invasives in that seed bank faster, and then basically just burn them off and kill them with fire this year. That's my goal anyway. Also, I learned something. If those listening remember the hawk video, I forget which episode that was, but the issue I had where a hawk killed my chicken and then came back for seconds, like 20 minutes after I scared it away. I learned that it was most likely, this came from a falconer, it was most likely a young hawk that was migrating through the area and saw an easy meal. And that's why he was so unaware of the situation. We'll just call it that.
Yeah.
Because after I put up that scarecrow or scarahawk dummy with a jacket and a hat on it, it hasn't been back at all. In fact, the chicken that was left over, I waited a few days, waited about a week, and then I took it and I tied it to a stake out in that food plot behind my shed to see what would come back and eat it. And the hawk never came back and touched it. So he moved on. And actually, I haven't seen him around. I mean, I see hawks around all the time, but not close by in the trees or anything. So that's my tip. Order your chickens. And if you have wildlife, increase your chicken order by 10% and be willing to donate some back to nature. But it really isn't an issue if you take care of them, keep them protected. And I think at some point here, we'll do an episode, or maybe I'll just do a video on the side, because I already recorded all of it last year. I just never cut it together. But on the essential components of a good chicken coop, I've got a pretty sweet setup. I mean, aesthetics aside, because I haven't actually finished the coop, the outside siding, and I had this plan drawn up to make it all fancy and pretty, but I built structure and automated every aspect of it that I possibly could, and that's kind of where it sits. And it's fully functional. It works really well. So there's a few key components to that we'll get into in a future episode here. Next week, we're actually going to have a guest on. It's not a name, a guest on the podcast. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this obesity drug that's being prescribed per government recommendations, and how that ties into our food system, and how that inevitably ties back into what Taylor's doing through regenerative ag, and what I'm trying to do with these orchard systems, and even just healthier land management all around. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. We're going to have this particular guest is a physician's assistant, and he works for his father's medical practice. So he's got a lot of experience in that field. So it'll be a good time. So come back around next week. If
the episode after that, we both should outline the farm operations for the year, because then I need to talk about how I'm gonna run cattle, pigs, and chickens all together.
Yeah, let's do that.
So I'm going a lot heavier in with the pigs this year, and planting those warm season covers, and that would go along with the soybean plantings for deer and corn plantings. I think I'm going to use the pigs mainly for that.
So that episode's going to be about both of our farming setups and probably spring food plots.
Yeah,
Should probably start talking about those. Yeah, the food plots. Start thinking about your food plots now. Um, Again, just have a plan. I mean, that's the best tip. Anything you're doing, try to have a plan. You know, like Taylor said, March is kind of one of those times where there's not a whole lot going on quite yet. So start planning, do some research, do a little bit of digging, and get prepared for the exciting time of the year, right? When things spring always comes and goes so quickly. You just
growing
can't
season.
yeah, it's like boom, all of a sudden everything's green and overgrown, and then you're dealing with that aspect of things, but it's exciting. So
I have
anyways,
found my favorite time is actually August.
yeah, I think August is
Well,
too
that's
hot
where
for me.
butterflies, man, butterflies and bees. That's when they're getting after it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a lot of wildflowers out there. I mean, I certainly appreciate that time, but weather wise, I really like the spring of the year. I'm going through all these videos right now trying to put together a slideshow to be playing in the back of my booth at these trade shows, and it's every time I click on a video in that May to June time frame, especially in my yard here because it's so quiet in this little bowl that we're tucked into. It sounds like you're in an aviary at the zoo. It's just birds all over. All you hear is birds
Yeah,
singing. You know, that's their mating season, and they're singing back and forth to each other. So I really, really like that time of year. But I guess everything kind of comes back around. There's
I don't
highlights,
know.
pros and
Pretty much
cons to every season.
I'll take any of those growing months versus this.
I don't know. I really like snow, honestly. What I don't like is this warm weather when it's supposed to be cold. I'd rather it just stay cold and then warm up. But the fluctuation that we've had where everything melts and it's rainy for a few days and it gets cold and snows for a few days and goes back and forth, that I don't really like that. And it's got to be hard on those wild animals too, trying
Yeah,
to
I think that
acclimate.
these rains have to suck.
Yeah, for sure. But with that, thanks for listening, Taylor. You have a wonderful afternoon. And yeah, catch you next time.
All right, man. Have a good week.
Later.